Hey everyone, Isaac here. So, I wanted to talk about an experience today that I think is somewhat associated with the whole news story that's been going on for months about former Olympic doctor Larry Nassar, who allegedly abused, hundreds of kids, and how you had literally hundreds of testimonies against him in court, and victim impact statements and family statements and such, and the real number of kids that he abused is probably hundreds, and the number of people that have been hurt by what he's done has probably been thousands when you account all the kids that went in and out of his office for, I don't know, 25, 30 years. And then in addition to that, you think about the impact of all of the members of various families of people that he abused. It's probably pretty high. And one of the most prevalent themes in this whole story, since it broke, since you had all those kids testify in court and family members of those kids, is that basically USA Gymnastics, not only for Larry Nassar, but for many other people, did not respond properly to allegations of sexual abuse and other types of abuse, and how there were many people, not only Nassar, but other people within USA Gymnastics, up to the highest level coaches, that were able to abuse kids and get away with it. They didn't have any fear of any type of punishment or anything like that. The actions of USAG allowed predators to flourish. And what I wanted to talk about is how this issue is not unique to gymnastics. That's not the only Olympic sport that we're having that issue with. Those of you who know me, who have seen videos I've made, years ago on other channels, might know that I am a Saber fencer. I have been fencing for 6.5 years. I started in January of 2012 when I was 14, and I competed between 2013 and 2015, 16-ish. Just the past few years I have been too busy, too much going on in order to afford to do it and do it regularly. And so that's just kind of is what it is, unfortunately. I would like to get back to it in the future, but my particular experience is with a coach that, come to find out, had been on the radar for years before I walked into his door. A mom in our homeschool group saw an advertisement for fencing lessons, and I had wanted to fence for a while. I'd seen, videos and stuff, but and parts in TV shows and movies where people were fencing, and I wanted to give it a try, but we never really got the opportunity until we found out about these lessons. And so we went in there. I went in there with some other homeschool kids, and I took lessons, and the head coach, who basically is a total crook, gave us our lessons and such. And it started out, he seemed really nice, warm, inviting. He was witty, clever guy. He could be everything that he pretended to be if he wanted to, but his behavior has been described as very sociopathic by many individuals within the fencing community. I fenced at his club for a little over a year and then switched to the club that I've been fencing ever since. And when I was competing, I did pretty well. Basically, in this part of the country, a lot of the big tournaments are hosted by colleges, or you have, larger size clubs that will hold tournaments in their facility, or in like a church gym or a school gym or something like that, and you'll have people that come from out of state to compete. South Carolina is not really good for fencing. Like, you don't have lots of great fencers here. If you go to, parts of New York, you go to parts of California, other places in the U.S. where you have a lot more fencing clubs, and a lot more good fencing clubs, then generally what happens is you have lots of events at these clubs that are so big they separate them by gender, which is of course what happens on a national and international level. But within the within the South, that's the sort of southeast part of the U.S. There's not nearly as many fencers as there are in a lot of the other states. So essentially, a lot of the big tournaments are, like I said, hosted by college clubs and some larger individual clubs, and they are mixed gender generally, because they'll end up being kind of small if you know, separate them by gender, but if you mix them together, then it's a much bigger event, and I like it that way. I like competing against both men and women, and I think I enjoy my fencing experience more if I'm in an event where I can compete against men and women, because fencing has been called physical chess. It's really more about the brain power than your sex or your muscles or anything like that. I mean, you can have lots of muscles, and the 14-year-old girl across the strip from you who's been fencing since she was 7 can kick your butt, basically. It's all about strategy. It's all about brain power. And really the most important physical part has a lot to do with physical endurance more than just pure strength. So I did fairly well going to these big tournaments at collegiate clubs and other clubs in the South. I did well. There was a time for about a year and a half where I was kind of on fire. I was dominating everywhere I went. I have so many medals from then, and I really loved that. I quit competing in mid 2016 or so, just because life happens and I've been so busy with everything. But the experience I had for the first year and 3 or 4 months when I fenced was, my coach, as I said before, seemed warm and inviting, but the more time went on, the darker and sinister he became. He became very verbally abusive. He became profane. He would make threats of physical violence and would say a lot of just really inappropriate things, to say to minors, both of a sexual nature and just a nature of physical threats. It became, apparent over time that there was definitely something up. And several months before I left the club, I was doing some research online, and I found some information from 2006 and 2007, I believe, that described allegations of a sexual nature, allegations involving physical assault, allegations involving major amounts of theft, and all of those happened, years before I went into his door. And what ended up leading me to quit there and actually go to another club was, I had fenced a tournament. It was like one of the tournaments that particular club that I was fencing at hosted, and I had a short bout with this one fencer that was really, really good, and I beat him. And I know it was in the first round, so where it's like 5-point bouts, so that doesn't necessarily count for a whole lot in the grand scheme of the tournament. I'm not going to get into describing tournament formats and how they work. They're a little complicated if you are looking from the outside, so that's just going to take a whole bunch of time that I'm not willing to spend. But what happened was, I had made a forum post on a fencing website. I don't really want this to be found. I don't even know if it's still out there, to be totally honest with you. But I had said, it was joking. It was in jest, and people took it way too seriously, where I was like, yeah, I bet, beat this really good fencer, high-profile guy, I've earned my bragging rights, that kind of thing. And if I had said it in real life to people, and I was just joking around with them, versus, posting it online, and was, in a manner that it looked like I was bragging and being a jerk rather than just joking around, which is what I was really doing. So I get a call from him, which is, an adult coach calling a 15-year-old minor rather than going through his parents. That was, kind of sketchy to begin with. But he said, I got a call from the fencer today. Any clue what that was about? And that he was pretty agitated. And I said, it was a joke. I'll remove it. And I went to the forum and found out that it was one of those forums where after you make a post, like after a certain amount of time, you can't go back and delete the post. It has to be deleted by an administrator. So I had made a post on the post requesting the administrators to delete that, and I sent a message to one administrator that I think I had interacted with maybe in real life at a tournament or something. I'm trying to remember, but it was just taken way too seriously, and I guess he was just watching to see what I did, so he called me and basically started cussing me out and being a total jerk. And the fact that he did that to me directly, being a 15-year-old kid. 15-year-old, you might have some 15-year-olds that are mature, but a 15-year-old is still a kid. 15-year-olds can't buy cigarettes or alcohol, can't join the military, most places can't get a driver's license, can't get a full driver's license at least. And he went over my parents' head straight to me rather than going through them, which is what would have been appropriate for that age, which I was sketchy to begin with. But he was very irate. He used a lot of profanity, and I was kind of scared because I didn't know what to do. I was like, if I come back to the club, what's going to happen? So I contacted the owner of the club that particular fencer was competing or fencing with and coaching it at that particular time. And he actually stated that fencer was never even angry at me when my former coach had said that he was effing fuming and several other things. And when I spoke to the owner of that fencers club, he said that he was never angry at me, that there really wasn't a problem, that he didn't take it that seriously to begin with. And so I talked to him over the phone, the owner of that club, with my parents on the phone, and the fencer actually came in while we were talking to him, and I talked to him briefly just to confirm that he was never irritated, and that it was just kind of a misunderstanding, and that was that. It wasn't really an issue. So after that, the owner of that particular club wanted to make us privy to a lot of the allegations that were hurled against my coach at that time. And he sent us some documents from when the accusations were made in 2006, 2007, and we were actually on the way to the club, myself and my father. We were going to have a talk with who was at that time my coach, the one that ended up being very abusive. And my mom actually called us on the way there because she had been reading the documents involving the allegations, and she said, "This stuff is disturbing. You have got to see this." And there was some messed up stuff in those documents, and it was just, I couldn't believe some of what I was reading. It was really, really bad stuff, and I was shocked because I knew he seemed to be like he was kind of a jerk, but I didn't necessarily think he was capable of what we read in those documents. And she was like, you can't go there. You've got to go home. And so after I come home and they're like, this is, this night is, or our previous night going there was our last night. We are not going back there anymore. We're not going to be around him. He texted my mother, and he said, "I see you've gotten in touch with the fencer that I beat and posted about online with the owner, or by the owner of the club. You know, I see you've gotten in touch with him through the owner of his club. Good luck with Isaac's future endeavors." And while I was at the club, he actually assaulted me, and we made a criminal report with the local police about a year later, and they didn't really take it seriously, not only because we waited a year, but or actually, really, that's all there was to it, was that we waited a year and we didn't go immediately. And, you know, my mom said in hindsight we should have gone to a doctor or ER, somebody, and had it medically documented, the proof of the assault medically documented, and then gone to the police station and made a report, because essentially what we had was a criminal complaint rather than a actual charge, which would basically add to the credibility of another charge if it was brought against him. But we found out about his record through several other sources, and he had done stuff like vandalism, slashing people's tires, different types of sexual allegations, other things that were just really messed up, that were allegations from unrelated people too. The only relation was that they were all fencing at his club, or actually he owns multiple clubs. He's owned multiple clubs at different locations over the years, and just lots of people have come out of the club saying the same thing. So the thing is that my parents ended up actually making a formal complaint through the U.S. Fencing Association, and they had this phone hearing with the coach and several officials from USA Fencing. And the thing is that none of the things that were ever reported to USA Fencing, which were actually quite a few disturbing things, they never brought that to the police, and they were mandated reporters. They were mandated to report what they heard to the police, and they did not. And nothing ever came of that hearing and our formal complaint process through the USA Fencing. Basically, what happened, whenever, you know, they actually had their hearing and the officials from USA Fencing heard from my parents and from the coach on their side of the, you know, on their respective sides of the story, what ended up happening was a whole bunch of members and parents of kids that fence at the club wrote a whole bunch of letters about just, they just made up a bunch of crap that never even happened. Like every single person, almost every single person, there were a few people that said things that were not particularly bad. They were things that happened, but they weren't bad, and then the majority of what was written was totally made up. There were flaws in all of it, and in most of it there were things that never happened. There were a lot of things that were over-exaggerated and misconstrued, and basically they were trying to outdo my parents. They were trying to get enough people to say crap and convince the USFA that nothing really happened. And it surprised me, because the fact that so many people, and many of these people I maintain to be my friends after I left that particular club, and they weren't, because the fact that so many of them just made up crap about me. And I was friends with some of them on Facebook at the time. One thing they mentioned in the report is that I had sent Facebook, you know, requests to a whole bunch of people in the club, and that was more me trolling, just kind of trying to mess with them, just because it's kind of what I do. But there were a number of people I was friends with that I legitimately liked, thought were good people, until they just made up crap about me in the documents that they sent USA Fencing. So they were, I guess you'd call it a quote-unquote trial through USA Fencing. They were, you know, he was found not guilty, not responsible. So nothing came of that, unfortunately. And the thing is that USA Fencing, when they got many of the allegations that were, hurled against him, and just lots of other allegations have been brought against him over the years, and USA Fencing continues to allow him to be a competing member and a coaching member despite the fact that they know what he's capable of and know what he's done in the past. And the only reason that I'm not naming him is because of the fact that he has more resources to sue me if he wanted to than I have to defend myself at this time in my life. Later on, when I have a lot more money, I will be completely open about everything that he said and everything that happened and who he is. But at this time, I can't risk that. I can't afford that. He has been accused of some crimes that are pretty bad, and I don't want him or one of his goons to just, come potentially victimize me at my place where I live or anywhere else. I can't risk that right now. In the future, when I have the money to have, full security system, guns in my house, with lots of ammo, and other resources to protect myself from him or anybody that he might send after me, then I would, be more public about it. But this is just a story that I have, and more people need to be aware of the signs of, somebody that you're working with within an Olympic sport, or even other things that might be sports or competitive activities that aren't considered necessarily Olympic sports. People need to be aware of the signs of abusive coaches and officials and clinicians and such within those sports, and they need to see the signs early, and they need to get the hell out of there if anything's questionable. So that's why I'm making this video, to raise awareness about the fact that I have experienced I guess what is the culture of abuse within sports, because obviously gymnastics isn't the only sport that has had this problem. Fencing is not the only sport that has had this problem. I mean, there have been other people in fencing. There have been people accused in many sports over time where the governing organization basically did a cover your ass until the person had been on the radar for a while, and lots of accusations have been brought against them, until an actual criminal charge was filed and they went to court. Basically they didn't do anything. It's easier for the organizations to do a cover your ass than to actually investigate and do justice by these kids. So that's all I have to say. And I just, for anybody that's going to any kind of sport, seeing any kind of sports medicine doctor, you need to be very careful and protect yourself if things seem like they're not the way they're supposed to be. If things become questionable, you need to do your due diligence and ask around and find out what you need to find out to protect yourself. And if you're a parent with kids that are athletes, protect your athletes as well. So that's why I'm making this video, because people need to be aware. People need to do their due diligence and protect themselves and their families and their kids, and I want people to be able to do that. So I hope everyone has a good rest of your week, and hope everyone has a good one. Well, I already said that when I said rest of the week. I really need to come up with a better outro for these videos. I kind of just go on a tangent like this, but I need to come up with like a formal one that makes sense rather than just something really cheesy. All right, signing off. That's a good one.